am so inspired. I was so inspired by the talk of Bob Stein, Michael E. And today we will have some very exciting history and experience. It will be presented by John Lee Wong about the Chinese laundries. I am so delighted. I will also share a little bit about my knowledge about Tan Chong Kun, Kun. And there will be slides. If Lily B can get to the slides, it would be fine. But what I want to do now is, while she is trying to get the slides going, is to ask John Lee Wong to say hello to us from north of San Diego. John, do you mind saying hello? Can't hear you. Hello? John?
Okay. All right, how about now? Hello?
I can hear John.
Okay.
Is John talking now? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name is John Lee Wong. I'm calling in from the Los Angeles area. And let's see, yeah, I will be talking about the history of Chinese laundries in San Diego a little bit later in the presentation.
Okay, so Lily, are you ready for the fishing part? Is Lily B having a problem?
I don't see her on the list.
I don't see her. I don't hear her, but I see the slides.
Right.
Yeah.
I think when Lewis mentioned to her that she was on there twice, she might have logged off.
Okay, I hear lots of people talking. Mute your phone, mute your microphone so that we can start.
I am here.
Lily B, are you back?
Hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
This is I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. I don't know where my phone is now.
Okay. While Lily B is working on the slides, I would like to ask John to tell us about the name Lee Wong, which is unique in the history of the Chinese names, Lee Wong. What, how did that name come about?
Well, traditionally with Chinese surnames, usually they are one syllable, okay? For example, usually either just Li or just Wong. My last name, as it is today, is actually a combination of both my family's family name and the paper name combined. So as many Chinese came over in the 1930s and 40s, is that they came over on paper names, and those were evolved from or derived from the San Francisco earthquake back in 1906, when there was a huge earthquake. And most of the city burned down because most of the city was built out of wood construction. And one of the buildings that burned down held the records for the immigration when Chinese came into the United States through Angel Island. And some Chinese went to the office, the immigration office, and said, "We are very worried about our immigration papers, because it was a very rigorous process to get in. There was a lot of interviews, and I don't know about interrogations, but basically interviews to verify that you were related to the person that that you claimed to be." So when they went and they asked, the immigration department didn't want people to panic, so they said everything is fine, okay? why don't you write down on a piece of paper what your family information is, how many family members you have, what cities you're from, and so forth, and leave it with us, and we will verify it and get back to you. So rather than admit that a lot of the records had burnt, they told everyone that everything was fine, okay, and that their records were okay. But one person added a few relatives, and word got around that they actually don't have the records because they verified that that the new information was correct. So people added more family members and relatives onto their family tree, and the information stayed that way. And at that time, you know, people were able to apply to sponsor family members and so forth, relatives to come over to the United States. And so they were able to, they definitely were able to sponsor and bring over the relatives that existed. But then at the same time, they also had extra members of family and relatives that didn't exist. So what they were able to do was sell the papers or the paper name to someone else who needed or wanted to come over, or someone who had relatives that they needed to bring over. And so family, friends, or relatives that wanted to come over. But the one caveat was they had to assume the name of the family that was sponsoring them, and that became the paper name. And so it was very common in terms of what was being done. And my family happened to be truly a Wong family, and the paper name was Lee. So when we were in, I came from a family of 7 kids, and I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. And at that time, my father received a call from one of the people that you know, that had been sponsored along the same family tree, and said that he was ill, and that the doctor told him that he only had maybe 6 months to live. And he said, I want to have my family's true name on my headstone when I'm buried. And so I'm just telling you so that when I report my name as being a paper name, they're going to come down the list, and someone's going to call you and say, you need to change your name as well. So that happened when I was 12, and I was the 5th oldest in our family. So the rest of my siblings had to change their name as well. So we had a meeting, and my father said, well, do you want to change your name to Wong starting, you know, in 60 days? And we didn't really want to go to school and change our name, you know, on a Monday and say, oh, that's not my name. So what we decided to do was write it out on the paper name. And when we graduated from high school and started to go to college, we would apply as AKA, and we decided to push the 2 names together. That's why my last name currently is 2 Chinese surnames pushed together. So that's why it's Lee Wong.
Thank you. Lily B, are you back? Can you do your presentation? You are muted. Muted. We cannot hear Lily B. We cannot hear Lily B. Okay. Okay, good.
Is it loud enough? Because I'm using my phone, actually.
Okay, we just have to be paying more attention, that's all.
Okay, so I am going to start. Okay, I'm gonna mute this one actually. Okay.
Are you ready to start this?
Okay, yeah.
Are you
let's
ready to
start with
start the
the
slide?
first slide. Do
Yeah.
you hear echo?
Yeah, some echo, but it's okay. Can we have the slides, please?
Yeah, that's the first slide. Okay, the first slide, I want to explain what happened. We originally planned this as a volunteer training. So now we're switching to the general public. And we want to make it a longer, just continue with our virtual meetings, but each session may become shorter. And starting in October, we would start at 10 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock. And so I'm still planning out the topics. But today we have a lot of things we can take slow, and if we don't finish, we'll continue, because this will become a long-term virtual meetings twice a month. And the first Saturday will be more of a, I guess, more casual. The third Saturday will be the lecture series, and they will start at 10 o'clock. So let's start. Go to the next slide. So we will cover the fishing business, the laundry business, and then the famous Aquin in Chinatown. And we'll see if we can continue on to the merchant partnership. So let's move on. So why did Chinese come to do fishing business? Why they could do it? So most people came from Canton at that time, and that was the capital of Guangdong. And fishing was common at the Pearl River Delta at the time. And so these people knew how to build ships. They knew how to build the Chinese junks, sampans, and they know how to fish and process captures. So they were the first people taking fishing vessels out of the harbor. So why did they come? This time, mid-1800, it was about 200 years into the Qing dynasty, which was prosperous. The population was very high, and also this is the time Europe already started the Industrial Revolution, and things were getting faster and better. China stayed in the agriculture farming business, and it really wasn't enough to support the people. Plus, there was famine and the wars. The wars was from the British, the French, and they were just not getting along very well. So with the famine and the flood and the wars, people go overseas to find ways of make a living. And that's why they came to the United States. And in the picture, you see this big Chinese sailboat called the Chinese junk. And it was actually built in San Diego Bay. So can we go to the next slide? The first time, I'm gonna move my phone away, see if you can still hear me, then I can turn it off. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, then it's better. Okay, so what I want to say is the Los Angeles Star, the newspaper, first reported of Chinese junk anchored in San Diego Bay in 1861. So they already started the business. And when they first started, look at this map, the circle on the left, that was a ballast point. That's where Chinese started. So the first Chinese probably came around 1850s from San Francisco, and then at the ballast point, they were next to the whaling station, so they were working together, really no friction, no problem. And then in 1871, the US government, US Army decided to build a fort for post-Civil War defense. So they decided to build a fort in Ballast Point. So they pushed the whalers and Chinese fishermen north, and they started to build up La Playa area and then Roseville. And that's where the fishing, that's where the shipbuilding started. They did the construction in Roseville. And then, okay, next slide, please. So gradually, more and more people came. So the business became bigger and better. So this is a artist's rendition of what the Chinese camp looked like. So the information was based on what Monterey was doing, and the background is Point Loma. So this is a picture imagined what it might have looked like. Look at, they built a platform. That way the junks, the ships could anchor there, and they can unload, offload things. And then the foreground, you see, it's a floating platform, much lower. Sampans, the small boats, could access. So what they did is they offload the catch, they process on this platform, and then if they had access, they would put on the steamship and take it to San Francisco for selling there or export. But what they want to sell in town, they would put on the sampans, and then they could go to shore. So I want to show you the next picture. Slide, next slide. Just have a view of what inside the junk looks like. It looks like a regular sailboat. You have sails, you have platforms, things, whatever they use. The difference is the bottom. So I will show you a picture of the design, but let's go to the next right now. What I want to point out is on the junk, there is a small, you see the small sampan on the left, and then next to the sampan is a wheelbarrow. And you see a colored wheelbarrow on the lower right. That is in our museum in display. It's exactly like that. I don't think it's the same one, but it's very, very similar. So Chinese fishermen were using this wheelbarrow to carry things. And in fact, some people on land could use it as a, we say, poor man's taxi. People could sit on the side, and one person would push it. So wheelbarrow was a very early invention. Chinese invented almost 2,000 years ago, and it went to Europe around the 12th century. So it was a small but very important invention. People could carry loads easily on rough terrain because there's only one wheel. You can go through very narrow passages. So let's go next. Okay, so this is talking about the basically the shipyard, the shipbuilding in Roseville. So by 1884, the community of La Playa has transformed into a pretty big village, and that's where the Roseville shipbuilding was. So the boatyard was established, and they used redwood for large Chinese junks or small sampans, and the redwood came from the north. So the other Caucasian ships were shipping these things for them. So they were helping each other. But they did use ironwood from China for masts and keels because they need very strong, very dense wood for that. So this picture was the one we showed earlier, the Sun Yan Li. It was built in 1884, 52 feet long. It is very big. If you're familiar with sailboats, 52 feet is very big. It's a 14.6 tons capacity. Some small ones still carried 5 tons. So at the peak, there were 18, I think they were, at the peak, there were 18 Chinese junks in the bay. But at that time, at least 12 companies, 4 European American companies, they operated together. And among the 18 junks, 12 were for catching abalone because that was the most profitable catch. Not only you can dry the meat, which is a delicacy in Asia, they could export. The shell became very popular for jewelry. So that was the big catch. But as you probably know, in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act came in the law. So it became difficult for Chinese laborers to stay. And further, in 1888, Scott Ed came along. If somebody who has been living in the United States, Chinese people, if they left the country, tried to re-enter, they were denied. And that's why this 1888 Scott Act was very brutal. Fishermen were on the ship. If they got out 3 miles, it was considered international water, so they couldn't re-enter. And that made the fishing very difficult. You cannot catch much within 3 miles. So because of that, the fishing business went down. So I talked about in early time, 1886, there were 18 junks. By 1888, dropped to 13. 1890, dropped to 6. By 1893, there was only 1 left. So let's go to the next one. Next slide. So this is what the junk look like. You can see clearly the bottom is completely flat. It's not like what we're used to seeing, the keel on the bottom. And if you look at the bottom center, there is a larger rectangular shape. That is the keel. So, and that is the ironwood I was talking about from China. And then the masts are ironwood. Everything else is redwood. And notice the sails, they're all square. Even in the front, the jibs, everything is square. That's the way Chinese junks were. And the design here, I got it from the New York Library website. And if you look at the scale, it's probably 55 or 60 feet long. So the Sun Yin Li I talked about is very similar to this drawing. So let's go to the next one. This is a model in our museum display. You can see it's, okay, so it's all redwood shacks, and then there are some sort of like tables they set up. They would continue drying some of the fish they got in through the sampans. So there are no junks here because it's shallow water. Junks have to anchor at deep water. That's why they would anchor in the harbor or near that platform they were working on. But within the shore area, so there much less work to do. So some of the fishermen would actually paddling around. Somebody's presenting by mistake. What happened? I'm sorry, I don't see the display now. So the model is in our museum. So if you come to the museum, you will see that model is representing around 1860 to 1890. So I am supposed to show the next slide. Shows the last Chinese fisherman, and it's a very lonely picture that you can see the ballast point, and there's a lonely Chinese junk and the sampan next to it, and there's a silhouette of one fisherman there. And it came from the book, 3 Beams of Light by Norma Ingle, who talks about her days growing up as a lighthouse keeper's daughter. They called the fisherman our Chinaman. So he used his sampan to tend his lobster traps, and the lighthouse family would visit him from time to time and give him certain food, the bakeries they did, and the Chinaman will give them lobsters as exchange. So they were quiet neighborhood. The guy didn't speak English much, but they just had very friendly gestures. And one day, the father, the lighthouse keeper, went to see the man, the fisherman, and found out he was dead. And that was the story of the last fisherman in in San Diego. I guess one thing I realized I didn't explain, some of you probably already know, when the Chinese Exclusion Act came out in 1882, it means people who were merchants could stay, but if you were laborers, you could not stay. And but at the time I said if they were already established here, they could return. By 1888, they couldn't return. So people try to become businessmen. So Louis, would you share?
Yeah, we can't see the slides. Please get the slides back on. Thank you.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. This is the right one. I think somebody accidentally shared the screen, and I don't know how that happened. And then Louis got lost. We lost Louis. Okay, here. So this is fine. This is where we are. Maybe go back up just to show the silhouette of the last fisherman. The prior slide. Yes, this is the picture, and it came from that book, This Lighthouse's Daughter. And if you see the lower right, you will see the vaguely a small sampan. Somebody was at the end of it. So it's a very lonely, sad ending. Okay, let's go to the next one. Sorry. So we talk about Chinatown being coming up. So what happened was the California Southern Railroad was constructed. It was finished in 1883. So a lot of people came in. Not just before the railroad finished, Chinese construction workers were there. So the Chinatown was already getting busier. And when the railroad finished, a lot of Europeans came in. So they just flooded the whole city. But they were buying fish, they were buying goods from the Chinese people. Everything was fine until there were more Chinese people, more Europeans came, and then this anti-Chinese sentiment built up, and that's when things went sour. But during the time, everything was good. A lot of construction was going on. So the pictures on the bottom show you, on the left is the California Southern Railroad from, I guess, now I can't remember the name, but anyway, it came all the way to National City. The second picture is a Hotel Del Coronado, and then the third one is the San Diego Flume, which brought water to the city. And then the last one is showing you a Chinese water pump that will pump water from the river or the dam into the farmland so they could irrigate their land easily. A lot of Chinese went to farming when they couldn't do fishing. They went farming. Some of them were cooks for different families. Some people went to laundry business. That's coming up later. So by the 1900s, the service industry continued to grow and was dominated by the laundries. So let's go to the next picture. This is my last one before we talk about laundry business. This is another model in our museum. It shows the 3rd Avenue where our museum is located. The museum is actually located on the lower left, but not the model, because the museum was not in this location in 1910. The museum got relocated to our current location in 1996. That's when actually a few years earlier, and then we opened the museum in 1996. I don't know, I'm getting confused. Sorry, yeah. So this is showing what 3rd Avenue, the old Chinatown, looked like. in 1910. What's interesting is it's a typical Western town with a lot of saloons and gambling halls and brothels and opium dens. If you look at on the lower left, where our museum is supposed to be, but then you see this brick wall of the next building. That building still exists. If you go to the 3rd Avenue, you still see that brick wall building and bay window in the front. It's a restaurant right now. So now we're gonna move on to the next slide. And John, would you unmute yourself and talk about the laundry business?
Okay, let's see. My name is John Lee Wong. My parents ran a Chinese laundry in San Diego, about 7 blocks from the Chinatown on 3rd and Island. And they ran the laundry from 1940 to 1974 when they were forced into retirement because the city came up with a waterfront development plan, and everybody had to sell their property for the redevelopment. But anyway, by then they were at that age where they were ready to retire anyway. And I am the 5th of 7 children. We grew up in the laundry, and we spoke Chinese. We worked there, and it was a very challenging childhood growing up, because we didn't have, the carefree childhood that all of our classmates had in school. I also visited the museum back in 2005 with my sister, and it was filled with wonderful exhibits. But I noticed that there was one thing that was missing, which was the history of the Chinese laundries in San Diego. So I spoke to the director at the time, and I said, my background is advertising and marketing. So I asked him if I was willing to put in the time to develop an exhibit on the history of Chinese laundries in San Diego. Would he consider making it part of the museum? And he agreed to. And so it took about 8 months to do the research and put the exhibit together. And that's the Chinese laundry exhibit that is in the museum today. Now, this character is a very interesting character. It actually is the symbol for the dream of Gold Mountain. Okay, it actually is not the older character where you had gold and mountain, 2 characters. This is actually made up of the character of for gold stacked into a mountain, 2 on the bottom, 1 on top. So it became the symbol for Gold Mountain, as well as the prosperity and the dream that the Chinese immigrants aspired to when they came to the United States. And initially in 1848, when gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in Northern California, that was the beginning of the gold rush. And by 1849, the word had gotten out all over the world, and even to Hong Kong, and then it went into the provinces of mainland China. And by 1851, lots of Chinese men, laborers, started coming to the United States. And 1851, there were 25,000 Chinese workmen that arrived in San Francisco, thinking that Gold Mountain was going to be an opportunity to be able to very easily, as they dreamed it, was to pick up gold right on the street. It was going to be easier than fishing, easier than growing, crops in the old country. But they found out that that was not so. There was no gold anywhere when they arrived at in the city. And they also found that there was also very little opportunity to actually work in the gold mines. And there were laws that restricted them from actually participating in the mines. And when they went to the gold mining camps, they were pretty much restricted to doing cooking, you know, domestic kinds of work, like you know, washing clothes and you know, basic labor. And actually, by the time they came over, most of them, which was in the early 1850s, the prime part of the gold rush was already over. So there were more Chinese coming over, and there was really no opportunity to, you know, to really mine. So they had to, most of them had bought one-way tickets. So they had to find work to, you know, be able to spend, to send money back home to the family. So, you know, they started to do whatever they could. And one of the things that they did was, you know, was to, little by little, was to go into the laundry business. So why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, as I mentioned, in 1851, there were, you know, lots of Chinese here, okay, with not much opportunity in terms of work. And in the spring of 1851, a Chinese man named Hua Li opened the first Chinese laundry in the United States. It was a small storefront and a basement in San Francisco. And one day he posted a sign out front that said, washing, ironing. And he lowered his price to a rate of $2 for a dozen pieces, which severely undercut the prices of, you know, the laundry services that were being provided in San Francisco by, you know, either, you know, women and also like the Irish immigrants and so forth. So they undercut the prices, and the demand, you know, really took off. And Hua Li was immediately overwhelmed by customers. In less than 3 weeks, he had 20 washermen working 3 shifts a day. And within 3 months, dozens of other Chinese hand laundries sprung up all over the city. And before long, Chinese laundries emerged wherever Chinese immigrants settled across the country. And by 1880s, there were over 1,000 Chinese laundries in San Francisco alone. Now, different regions had different problems in that, you know, in San Francisco, the Chinese laundries were competing against, you know, some of the Caucasian laundries in the city. And as they went south, they were competing against the African-American women who were at that time doing the domestic work and doing, taking care of the laundry. And it's interesting because, you know, if you look back in the history of China, is that there was no precedent of Chinese men doing domestic work, whether it be cooking, cleaning, and especially not doing laundry. So it was, you know, survival by necessity, and they found this as an opportunity to, you know, to create their own well-being here in the United States. So by 1900, most large cities in the United States had Chinese laundries, and at that point, they actually employed 75% of all the Chinese men. Also at that time, because of the immigration laws that, you know, the Chinese communities were primarily a bachelor society because they were male workers who came here, and, you know, and there were very few women, Chinese women here in the United States in the late 1800s. The Chinese immigrants chose to open laundries. Why? Because, you know, they were here, they didn't have much money, and it was the quickest way to become their own boss without really having to know much English, and, you know, not requiring them to have, you know, a nest egg of money to, you know, to invest. All they knew was that it required a little bit of soap, water, and a lot of elbow grease. And it also allowed them to qualify as merchants. As Lily was saying earlier, is that the Exclusion Act of 1882 was passed, and it was to limit Chinese immigration, but it also would send you back to China if you were not a merchant. So it was a, you know, one of the easiest ways to set yourself up as a, you know, accepted, qualified merchant here in the United States. And that was in 1882. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, this here is when I was doing my research on Chinese laundries. I went to you know, some of the, you know, valuable resources in San Diego, the Historical Society, as well as the California room in the old library up on I believe it was on 9th and E. There was a room up there on the upper floor, and they had all the historical stuff. And you know, you had to know what you were looking for, and you would ask them. They would go in the back and bring out what they had, little by little, one book at a time. And you know, you just have to be very patient in trying to find what you're looking for. This is probably this actually is the oldest photo of a Chinese laundry that I was able to find in the historical archives when I was there. During my research period, I probably spent about, well, the research period and developing the exhibit was about 8 or 9 months, but I spent, you know, in different sessions, probably over that period, I probably spent about 8 or 9 days up at the California room, and this was the earliest picture I could find of Chinese laundry. The Jim Lee Laundry, and it's on this location is on I believe it's on 3rd Street, and the history of Chinese laundries in San Diego is actually I would say it's not very well defined. When I was doing my research, I found this picture, and then I decided that one of the best ways to try and trace down, you know, the locations of the laundries and the names of the laundries was to go through all of the business and phone directories for San Diego. And what I did was, as they brought out each book, I had my camera with me, and I photographed every page that was the laundry section. And then I went home and I sorted them all out by what appeared in all of those different directories for the different years. And then I distilled it down to the first year that they appeared in a directory, okay? And it came down to about a little over 100 Chinese laundries between just after the Civil War, all the way up to about 1970. Okay, by 1970, there actually weren't any more new Chinese hand laundries that were opening. So that was a good bracketing area to explore. And you know, in terms of the first Chinese laundry, nobody really knows who or what was the first Chinese laundry or hand laundry in San Diego. But according to the San Diego County Medical Society, there was one mention of one of the city's first residents. His name was Dr. Sing Ping, and he was a physician, and he was a graduate of the Peking Medical School, and he was a Chinese herb doctor. But because he couldn't make a living just being an herb doctor, he was also practicing what they called the art of laundry at the same time. So, you know, he ran 2 businesses at the same time. And that was one of the earliest residents, physician residents in San Diego. From there, I was able to find that by the 1870s, there were a few Chinese hand laundries in the Chinese Quarter and in the Singiri district, okay? And 16 years after that, okay, between 1886 and 1887, from looking through the first edition of the San Diego City and County Directory that was published, is a very thin little book, okay? It'd almost be like a program, not much more than a program that you would be handed when you go to the music center today. It was that small. But at that time, there were only 3 Chinese hand laundries that were listed in there. And they were Hong Sing Lee on 6th Street between I and J, Jim Lee Laundry, which is this picture here. And it was on 3rd Street and H, and Sam G Laundry, which was at 6th and J Street. Now, the Jim Lee Laundry, there seems to be, in my research, that laundry showed up in 2 locations. So I couldn't figure out whether there were actually at one point 2 locations, or whether they started out at 1 and then they eventually moved to the second one. But in either case, it was one of the earliest registered Chinese hand laundries in San Diego. So why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, from my research, what I did was I was able to get my hands on a very, very early map of San Diego. It was one of the earliest gas station maps that you can get, that you used to be able to pick up when you went to like a Chevron station or whatnot. But it was from, I believe it was probably from the early 1940s. But anyway, I used that as a base, and from all of my research through all the directories, I alphabetized them, and then I plotted them on this map of San Diego. There were I found just over 100 Chinese laundries through all of the resources that I had gone through. Now, that doesn't mean that every single laundry that ever existed in San Diego is on here, but there probably weren't many more, because I think that you obviously had to have a license to do business, and going through, you know, the directories and the business files. This was what I was able to find. There, in this map, I think there might have been 3 laundries that were at one location at one time, and they moved to a different location. So you could see in the bottom center, there's a yellow square. That is the Chinatown that we know of today, which is primarily 3rd Street between Island and J Street. That's the Chinatown, that yellow square. And you could see that initially the Chinese laundries started out serving Chinese clients. And, you know, probably more the business people who could afford to hire somebody to do their laundry. Most people might have done their own. But they started around the Chinatown area, and little by little, they started to spread out. And then in downtown, there were a lot of hotels, and you know, along Broadway and north and south of it. So these and they were resident hotels. They weren't like for vacationers. There were people who, they're more like boarding houses. There was a hotel room and then a common bathroom and kitchen facility, but people lived there, and they didn't have washing facilities. So a lot of the laundry would come down to over the counter to these laundries. So you could see it started to spread out. You can see where 16th Street is. You could see laundries starting to spread farther east. You can see laundries spreading up towards Balboa Park and north of that. There's actually even, there were even laundries that started to go as far as Escondido, La Mesa, La Jolla, and National City. So this map represents, you know, the laundries in San Diego between the period of 1886 and 1970. Okay, go to the next slide. Okay, early San Diego Chinese laundries were created, as I mentioned, to serve Chinese customers, and and then they moved, started to spread out, and to different parts of the city. But one of the evolutions that happened in San Diego was the nature of San Diego also, began to change. I guess just before World War II, the Navy started coming in. I believe it was the 3rd Fleet and the 7th Fleet were both stationed in San Diego. And the Marine base was here. The Coast Guard base was here. There were lots of hotels. So some laundries just continued to handle over-the-counter business. People would bring in their shirts and whatnot, socks and their personal laundry, and a lot of small laundries would just do that. And in the early days, a lot of the laundries were not licensed to be able to have washing machines. So everything had to be done by hand. But as business grew, they started to take some of their laundry to larger laundries that were at the time doing excuse me, that were doing hotel linens and tablecloths and things. So they had larger capacity and washing machines. They had the machines, they had the drainage to support the machines. So the smaller laundries brought their goods to have it wet washed and then partially dried and then brought back to the hand laundries where things were done by hand iron. But a number of other Chinese laundries started to gravitate towards, going into the hotel linen and tablecloth laundering. Others started to tap into servicing the military, where they would wash and press uniforms. And, the harbor was filled with ships. There were aircraft carriers, battleships. There were probably 10 or 12 of them in the harbor at any one time, and they could not wear civilian clothes onto the ship. So there were locker clubs where they could rent a locker, and when they got off the ship, they could change out of their uniforms into civilian clothes, and then the locker clubs would wash their uniforms, press them, and have them ready for them to go back to on board the ship. And when they were on the ship, they had their civilian clothes in the lockers, which then were also needed to be washed and pressed. A lot of the Chinese laundries, like my parents' laundry at that point, had evolved and started to do military uniforms and civilian clothes that belonged to the military when they were on shore. So so there was, so there started to be like 3 different kinds of Chinese laundries. And at that point, I would say in the mid 1940s to late 1940s, the Chinese laundries started to also, incorporate steam machines for pressing and so forth. So, some of the laundries remain, just hand laundry. They just did over the counter. They still had people washing, doing the washing for them. But, the diversity of the different Chinese laundries started to expand. In those businesses that were working on military uniforms, they were known, especially during the summer months when the Navy wore white cotton uniforms, and they'd have to be, changing between those and the blue working dungarees. That a lot of the Chinese laundries that were servicing the military were known to be working around the clock. they would be running three 8-hour shifts a day, people coming in and working and working. And because of the need of the military, a lot of times those uniforms had to be turned around as quickly as, 1 hour. So you can imagine going to pick up the uniforms at the locker clubs or straight from the ships, bringing it back to the, to the shop, washing it, pressing it, folding it, and getting it back to them. I would say it was a fat 1 hour. I mean, it might have been, it might have been 2.5 hours, but that was the pressure to turn those things around. So anyway, so that's how, the Chinese laundries evolved in San Diego, from hand laundry to, to really anything that, specialized clientele would need or demand. So next slide. Okay, so I showed you a map that plotted out, over 100 Chinese laundries between 1886 and 1970. And, that map is on display at the museum in the Chinese laundry exhibit. And beside the map, there's an index that shows, all of the names and the years. That list was compiled alphabetically so that, grandchildren or relatives who come to the museum and know the name of the laundry that their parents or their uncle or their grandparents owned and operated in San Diego could easily find it and locate where it was in the city. But the big surge actually came between 1936 and 1955. When I broke the list down that way, I would say close to half of those 100+ laundries emerged or were in business at that time. And, they were, most of them were, were the first generation Chinese, meaning Chinese that were born in China, came here and started their businesses. And their children lived in these laundries and worked there before and after school. This is actually a photograph of Sun Li Laundry. It is the last Chinese hand laundry in San Diego. It's still in operation today. It's located on C Street and 13th Street. And, it opened in 1940, about the same time as my parents' laundry opened. And it's still in operation right now. It's run by one of the sons, second generation son, who actually attended college at UCSD along with his two brothers, but chose to come back to help his father run the laundry. And when his parents were no longer able to run it, he decided to continue it. And to this day, he still runs it. I believe he's probably late 60s today, but they open from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And if you are ever down in San Diego and you drive by 13th and C, the building looks exactly like that. So in talking about growing up in the Chinese laundries, most of the families lived in the back of the laundry. So, when it closed, they basically, would turn out the lights and go to the back of the laundry. In this case, this is attached to a residence, but most of the Chinese laundries that were in the city that were storefronts, the back half of the laundry was divided by a cloth curtain, and you would go, they would just go back there, cook their dinner, sleep, and then, wake up and reopen again. And for the most part, it was 6 to 7 days a week, at least 6 or 7 days a week. Sometimes, on Sunday, you wouldn't necessarily open business over the counter, but you had so much preparation to do, for the coming week that it basically was, was a 14, 15 hour a day, 7 days a week, job. Most of the kids that of laundry owners that I grew up with, we knew all of them because in the mornings we had to be at school by 9 o'clock. So by 8 o'clock, they were all walking to school, and we would walk from our laundry to another laundry that was 5 or 6 blocks away. They would join us and we would walk. So there might have been, at times, it could have been, 8 to 12 of us, walking together to, our elementary school. And then we would walk back to the laundry afterwards, work in the laundry, and then start our homework at 9 o'clock after the work for the day was done. So anyway, go to the next slide. Okay, this is a slide of part of the Chinese laundry exhibit down at the museum. There are a number of, tools that were from my parents' laundry, as well as, excuse me, artifacts that that I remember seeing, but were long gone. And so putting the exhibit together, I did a lot of research, and where I wasn't able to find and assemble or collect items from our laundry, I was able to meet with and talk to some of the other laundry owners that were in business at the time that my parents' laundry was in business. And because they knew who I was as a kid, and I was friends with their children, and I could speak the village dialect. So, if I called them or I knocked on their door, and I tell them who I am, they would open the door, invite me in, and they would tell me, they would show me whatever pictures they had. And in many cases, they actually, were more than willing to let me make scan copies of their pictures and, with their permission, put them into the museum exhibit. And that was something that probably only could have been done at that time, which was the early 2000s, because by that time, most of the owners were either passed away or they were, in their late 70s and 80s. And I was able to, be able to, talk to them and, with their trust that they were talking to somebody that they knew, was doing something legitimate with their information and belongings from their laundries. And some of the artifacts I was able to find online and acquired. Some of the oldest hand irons, were found through online auction houses and people listing, a few listing on eBay. There are also some, I think there's one political cartoon, printed political cartoon from, I guess it was the early 1900s, that shows the, the discrimination that was going on during the Exclusion Act days and so forth. So anyway, these items, as well as many photographs and, the historical map and the locations of the laundries are all down at the museum. So, it's there for people to, to check out, when they happen to be down that way. The machine in the middle is actually a marking machine, because when people brought clothes into the laundry, you'd have to take the order apart, separate it into white clothes, medium tone clothes, dark clothes, and then wash them, press them, fold them, and then be able to put it all back together. So every piece had to have a code written on there, or ID mark, so that you could sort the laundry out and put it back together. And I would say 99.9% of the time it was correct. Every once in a while somebody would come back and say, I'm missing something, or these aren't my socks. So yeah, so anyway, that's what that machine is in the middle. And yeah, this was put together back in 2005, and the exhibit was completed, and all of the contents were donated to the museum by myself. So that's an overview of the history of Chinese laundries in San Diego from 1886 to 1970. And current day, the one last laundry meaning last Chinese hand laundry. Today there are, I believe there are probably still some Chinese laundries, but they're not necessarily hand laundries anymore. A lot of them, there's some Korean laundries that basically they just take in dry cleaning, send it out, and then they return it to the customers over the counter. But in terms of the traditional Chinese hand laundries, Sumi Laundry is the last remaining one. And that's it. Thank you.
Lily C, it's your turn.
Thank you, John. I wanted to say thank you one more time on behalf.
A good lecture, very interesting.
Very wonderful. Yes, and the fact that we were able to recruit John Lee Wong to talk about the laundries and to talk about his own family laundry and his name. This is absolutely amazing, because I know of one Lee Wong family, that is the John Lee Wong family, the only one in the world, the only one in the world. So I'm interested in continuing this conversation regarding the laundries, because I believe it's totally fascinating. But you think about how his family worked in the laundry. We have a photograph or two of John's mother, I believe, in our exhibit. You should look at the kind of space they had. They lived in the laundry. And John told me how they work in the laundry. So it is hard work, as you said, water, soap, and elbow grease, but it's all a lot of sweat. Thank you. So I am so honored to be able to present to you what I know and what we know about Akun. Okay, actually, when I first saw the name Akun, I just knew it was there was a huge mistake about his name, because really, Kun is part of his first name, the second part of his first name. His first name is Chong Kun, which means very bright, very clever, and Kun is part of the word Qian Kun, which means very global, very universal. So his parents gave him this name, and he became such a person. Unfortunately, his English Akun has very little, just the Akun. So in Canton, where my grandparents, my mother came from, they call each other something, something. So the became part of his name. It was never his formal name. This gentleman, Kun, his formal name is Tan Chong Kun. Tan is a last name, and it is also spelled as Tan, Tom, Hom. They are the same. So he was born in Canton, Actually, Canton is the word that is used now for Guangzhou, but Canton is also actually a Chinese province. Guangdong, Dong means the east. So this province, Guangdong, is where most of the early Chinese came from, almost 100% probably. So it is at the port near the mouth of the Pearl River Delta, and in the 1800s, there were lots of floods, famines, rebellions, and wars. So many men left China, left the Pearl River Delta to come to the United States. And as John said, they came to the Gamsan, the mountain of gold. They thought they really such a sad story for many, because as soon as they arrived in San Francisco, they realized that wasn't the case. He went to San Francisco as a teenager, but before he came, he lived actually in Guangzhou, the Canton, and he learned, he was literate. He was bilingual and biliterate. He learned Chinese, he learned English. So he was able to actually read and write in English and in Chinese. Many of the things that we know about this gentleman came from the diary that he wrote in English. And this diary is valuable. And Murray Lee, in his book, In Search of the Golden Mountain, the Gold Mountain, I think it's important for you to see this book. I use this book as a reference as well. Talked about the Gold Mountain. So he came. And may I have by the way, he passed away in 1914. He was born in 1848. So he died rather young, and it was an accident. He was on his way to attend his grandson's birthday party, and he was that was an accident, and he was killed. Next slide, please. So when he first came to the United States, he actually went down to Santa Barbara, and you can see the picture of him in Santa Barbara with a queue and a Chinese a jacket and Chinese pants. And so when he was in Santa Barbara, he began to wear American clothes, but he still kept his queue. He was there for a little while, and he decided then to go up to Alaska. He joined a ship, and then he went up to Alaska. It was during this time in Alaska that he decided to cut his queue, and he saved some of his hair and gave his hair to some of his good friends. And there in Alaska, he served as a cook. And I read something about his ingenuity. He was able to make 2 meals each day for many people. And then during that period, he of course wrote about his little bit about his experience. Then he came back to San Francisco again, and then through San Francisco back to Santa Barbara. And with his little, actually, I think his little English and not so much Chinese, he was actually teaching English because he was helping others. So I could see him as a mediator at that time, also as a social worker. He was already into the business of becoming a community leader. Okay, next slide, please. So at that time, the California Southern Railroad was being built. And some of the people thought it might be a good idea to see if we can hire some Chinese to help build the railroad. As you know, many Chinese became part of this huge construction of the U.S. Intercontinental Railroad, and also the Southern Railroad. But there were a lot of people who objected to the notion about using the Chinese as railroad construction workers because they saw the Chinese as being very weak and being very meek. But the person who was on top said, my goodness, if the Chinese could build the great wall in China, they certainly could build the railroad. And indeed, I must stress the fact that so many Chinese putting their sweat, blood, and tears into the building of the American railroad system. And whenever I travel on the railroad, I remember the many lives, not just Chinese, but many lives lost in this huge construction. So Akun became a key player in this process. I think we have to thank him for his ability to speak the two languages, his ability to connect the two cultures, his ability to be a mediator, and his ability to create opportunities, job opportunities for many of the Chinese people on the Southern Railroad construction. He became a recruiter, a mediator, someone who could solve problems for others, and a leader, a community, Chinese community leader. Next, please. So you wonder, did he get married? Yes, he did. He married a young lady, Sue, at least 12 years younger than he, from San Francisco. Sue grew up in San Francisco. She was also bilingual and biliterate, I believe. So the two of them created such a beautiful family with beautiful names. One of them is Lily, Lily, Lily Aquin, okay? And you can see this family portrait of 12 children. I look at these kids and I look at what they were wearing, and you can see such a blending of the East and the West. And I kept staring at this picture and saying, wow, these days in San Diego, if we can find one family in San Diego in this large community with 12 children, that picture should also be brought out, but I doubt very much. So you can see Sue, you can see actually Aquin and all his children. Such a precious picture. Next page. So he was in all kinds of businesses, being a mediator, recruiter. He also had business in downtown, what we call Chinatown today. He was very smart guy. He also did real estate and had a farm, had a produce store and restaurant. And so he became the unofficial mayor of Chinatown, of San Diego. By the way, this building is very much like it was before, and it is right across the street from the Mission Building on 3rd Avenue, 3rd and J. So police chief said Aquan was without exception the finest Chinaman I knew. I think in this case, Chinaman did not mean anything demeaning, just a Chinese person. But I think later on, Chinaman took on a very different meaning. So you can visit this building if we can arrange a tour. On the two sides, I think one side is a parking structure for trucks. The other side is more a storage. So the Aquin produce store is a historical site in downtown San Diego. Next slide, please. I think this is where I end, right? Lily? Turn on your mic, please.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry about my problem with the computer today. I actually had two devices right now. That's why you see me walk away. My phone has the audio that I could hear. I cannot hear from my iPad, so I got two going on. So I'm really sorry about today's confusion, but I hope next week when we get on Zoom, it'll be a lot easier. But I thank you both, John Lee Wang and Lily Chang, to bail me on and with wonderful presentation. And I'm just kind of organizing things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have left, and maybe other people can chime in when we talk about the merchants. And I'm thinking we probably should finish it around 11 o'clock, and then we'll pick up next time. Next time we will start at 10 o'clock. No more 9 o'clock. We will do from probably 10 to 11:30 or 12 o'clock in the future, and we'll do twice a month. So, okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the CCBA. CCBA is a very important building in the Third Avenue or old Chinatown. So originally there was a Taoist temple in that same spot. And it was in 1911, a new building was built, and it was occupied by what's called a Jigong Tang. It was a group of people. It's actually the Chinese Freemasons. So they were known to help plot Dr. Sun Yat-sen's revolution and the founding of the Republic of China. So they were very significant in Chinese history. In 1920, the CCBA took over the Tang and became the principal organization representing the San Diego Chinese. By 1930s, this building housed the Chinese language school. So next time when we talk about Chinese language school, I love to have Zhang Li Wang and David C. to chime in because you guys have personal experience. And then in 1970, CCBA became a nonprofit organization. They focus on charitable, social, and cultural support for the community. In 1999, it completed the adjacent senior garden apartment with affordable houses, and you can see those building now. And next time, I think Bob Stein is going to talk about some of the archaeology findings when they were building this apartment building. Another thing worth noting is CCBA is the sponsor for the Lucky Lion Dancers that they perform in various occasions, especially the Chinese New Year street fair on the Third Avenue. And a lot of activities happen during that street fair. So next, please. Next slide. Okay, here is another building that is still the same old building from the old days. It's a Ying'an Labor and Merchants Association. Just from the words, you know, they have an organization help Chinese people who want to establish business and also help coordinating labors. So they were more of a business organization as opposed to a community social organization that CCBA serves. And this association still exists. And they usually operate upstairs. Downstairs is rented out for other business right now. So let's go next slide. So now I'm going to talk about some of these businesses. The business associations help people building business, especially after the Chinese Exclusion Act. If you wanted to stay, you needed to have business. Laundry business was one way to do it. Some people were doing better. They team up with other friends and they opened general stores. Some were doing more of a grocery with various things. So this Jingwing store, we also have a model in the building, in our exhibition. I don't have a slide to show, but Jingwing store and the Wuqichang store were two major general stores in Chinatown on the Third Avenue. And that's where the buildings were demolished and turned into the senior apartment building. So as I say, they this is a general store, so they imported goods from China and they sold groceries and various souvenirs things, anything related to Asian, they sold to San Diego Chinese and Caucasians. So during World War II, they also served as a mailing address for a lot of local people who did not have an address. So it's kind of a social service for people. And the picture shows the people who own this business in front of it. Next, please. Next is one Wuqichang store. Wuqichang store is wider in the Jingling store, and both of them are very deep. They're very deep into the depths. They're probably normally the storefront is not very wide, but they're very deep. So you will see that in our model. Wuqichang store has a 96-year legacy. A lot of people remember going to Wuqichang store because they closed in 1995. They opened in 1899. So they have a very long legacy in the neighborhood. They sold all kinds of goods. They also branched out to other locations, Chula Vista, Kearney Mesa, and Oceanside. And I think that a lot of people probably went to different locations for the Wuqichang store. And they also worked as a mailing address for service people during World War II. And this particular photo was done in 1937. It was January 1st, celebrating the, I guess, the regular New Year, not Chinese New Year. So it's pretty interesting here. The next one, next slide, is another store, Kunming store. This is a little upper scale. They sold more expensive collector's items, or maybe jade or jewelry from China. And eventually they actually opened up additional stores in Del Mar and La Jolla. And so here we say lodging was on the second floor. In fact, all the stores typically have lodging upstairs, and they raise their families, and they also rent it out. So at this point, John Li Wang, would you say something about the stores? Do you have some experience, personal experience?
Well, I remember growing up in San Diego, going down to Chinatown. I remember going to Gim Wing because it was located right next door to the Chinese school. I remember going into that store. I remember the layout of the store very well in my head. I think it was a son, Dexter, was probably about 2 years older than me. So, so we would go and we would play with him. Even went upstairs up into the, it was the residence area. And in the old days, it was probably residence and also a boarding house. I remember when the Chinese school was up on 6th and A Street at the recreational center of a church up there, that when we walked to Chinese school, we used to walk past Kunming, this store that's in the photograph. It was a very, very upscale store. I mean, we would peek in the windows and we'd see all the, the cloisonne, the rosewood furniture, all of the, the high-end decor stuff. It was a very impressive store. Let's see. I also remember growing up, the other buildings in Chinatown, the Aquin residence, the CCBA building where the Chinese school was, as well as the Chinese Masons residence apartment building up on 3rd and Island on the southeast corner. Yeah, so I mean, I think that yeah, a lot of these buildings and businesses that you mentioned, were still in operation at that time. Wuchi Chong was there, not the store that you showed from the early 1900s. They moved to, I guess they must have acquired the property on the corner and built a more modern store there. So yeah, so it was all, part of, my childhood growing up, because, at the time, San Diego downtown seemed really big, but, now that when you drive through it, the 10 blocks or 12 blocks that you went one way or the other is actually a very small area. But it was an interesting time, to grow up there.
Thank you. Thank you for adding the personal touch.
Okay.
Can we go to the next slide? Okay, here we're going to talk about Chinese medicine, and then we will end. So this is part of an exhibition now in the museum. When we open, you will see. For traditional Chinese medicine is based on the use of herbs, acupuncture, and balanced diet. So if somebody falls ill, it's believed that the yin and yang forces are not balanced in your body, or there's blockage in your meridian. So if you go to the herbal doctor and then they give you some prescriptions and then give you some acupunctures, it will rechannel the natural energies, and so your own body will help you heal. So in the picture, you see a little dummy or a person. That is actually a model to show where all the acupuncture points are located. And the doctor can show that to the patient to explain what he's going to do with the acupuncture. Sadly to say, this dummy was stolen a few weeks ago. We hope we can continue with our display. Even without the dummy, we can still explain the stories. So in the 20th century, doctors have discovered that acupuncture can be used as an anesthetic for surgery. And the reason is because it actually stimulates the release of endorphins, the brain's natural painkillers. So it's amazing that in 20th century, we have all this technology, and we are finding out how Chinese medicine worked. Chinese doctors didn't know. They just knew what to do. They didn't know the reason why it worked, but it worked. So just continue doing what you learned. Let's go to the next. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention, in that picture, you see a sign on the upper. There's a sign of the store. Actually, that's the Jingling store sign. We luckily to have a sign. That was the actual store sign. They donated to us. So now we're hanging here. We pretend we're having a store in this corner. Anyway, okay, next. Thank you. So this is what like a little cove in the museum. This is a display for a Chinese medicine area. So we put out a lot of things that's related to the Chinese herbs, Chinese doctors, the books they use. But in those days, just an herbal store or doctor store is insufficient to make a living. So they usually serve as a general store as well. So they sell things that a general store would sell. And that's why you will see some of the things on the right. We have a various little sculptures or terracotta things. So they're souvenirs type of things they also sell, or decoration people buy to sell. And in the back, you notice a cabinet that has quite a story, because it was, I'm trying to see what, it was, so there's a story. So there was a Far Eastern Oriental importing store owned by Tom Choi, who sold herbs, and that's his cabinet. So later, around the 1930s, he decided to close his store and become a farmer. His next door neighbor the Royal Pie Bakery, owned by Alex Kuno, kept this homemade redwood herb cabinet on the second floor in his property. He's kept it for decades. So when our San Diego Chinese Historical Museum opened, Alex Kuno donated the cabinet, still with herbs in the drawers, to our museum, as it's displayed here. So it's redwood. It was built in California here locally, and it was used by a Chinese herbal doctor, and then it was stored by the bakery shop, and then it came to our museum. So it has quite a story. I just think it's really a wonderful story. And as I said, it was common for grocers and merchants to offer herbs on the site. So that's why we're trying to simulate imagine the store that has herbs. And it was already mentioned, the first resident physician was a Dr. Xing Ping, and he also operated a laundry on the site. So that was kind of an interesting story. Let's go to our last slide, or almost last slide. Because we're talking about different businesses Chinese people owned, one of the businesses was actually gambling. It may not be the best business, but it was making money, so some people went into that. Chinatown was considered part of the red light district, and it's also known as the Stingery. Stingery is the stingray in San Diego Bay that if you walk in the water, you may get stung by them. So people say if you go to the red light district, you may get stung just as bad as being stung by a stingray. That's why the nickname is Stingery. And so there were gambling houses and opium dens operated in this area. And they also sold lottery tickets. Actually, when we talk about lottery tickets, some general stores, even fish peddlers, sold lottery tickets. So many people were buying them, not just Chinese, just the whole San Diego community. People were buying lotteries. And in the display, this was actually a display we had. Again, part of the items were stolen, but we still have this the puncher, the hole puncher. What they would do is once they draw the winning characters, the ticket has like 80 characters, and when you buy it, you can choose which characters you want to choose. It's like a bingo, and then they're marked. So when they draw the winner, they would punch holes for the winning characters, and then they can match to people who claim they won something, and they put this like a template with holes, and they can match if you have your characters marked in those spots. It's just like bingo. So when you match more, you win more. You match less, you win less. So that's what they were doing. And on the display on the left, you actually see it's a mahjong case, and then there's some domino on the bottom. Oh, actually, mahjong tiles also on the display table, and there's some, I guess, some money or fake money and dice. On the right side, there are actually opium pipes and various things used for the opium pipe components. And the paper, square shape, are the actual lottery tickets, your bingo tickets. Remember earlier I showed you the model for the Third Avenue, and I pointed out the building with the brick wall. That was an opium den listed in the city directories of 1889 and 1890. Now it's a restaurant. So it was interesting to know the exact same building. It was an opium den. And I think that was this is the end of today's presentation, but I want to just show you the next page to tell you what is coming up. So next time we will talk about the Chinese Community Church, the Chinese Language School, and then the history of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. And then we will also add in the archaeology findings. Bob Stein will talk about that. And then Chinese World War II veterans that Jack Mung would talk about. So as I say, next time it will be the first, wait a minute, no, next time we still have the 9 o'clock for next Saturday, it's still 9 o'clock. After that, in October, we'll start changing to 10 o'clock. So are there any comments or questions? And anybody? Okay, thank you so much for signing in today, and sorry for all the technology problems, and I hope next time we will have a smoother opening, and just thank everybody to join us today.
Very interesting lectures.
Lily B.
Yes, it's hard to hear. Let me.
I thought the lectures were very interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's very hard to hear because I have to use